everyone. Scott Mantz here with a brand new episode of Consider This. So at the AFI Film Festival and the Toronto International Film Festival, I saw the film Nuremberg, and wow, the film is powerful. It is amazing. It is an instant classic about a World War II psychiatrist played by Oscar winner and Emmy winner Rami Malek, who was analyzing a top Nazi official played by Oscar winner Russell Crowe, who is giving his very best performance in many, many years. I'm so excited to be joined right now by writer and director James Vanderbilt. James, thank you so much for joining me on Consider This.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Scott, and thank you for that introduction.
Well, I got to say, so I did see the film for a second time at the AFI Film Festival. Also saw it at the world premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival. This is your second film as a director, your first in 10 years, your biggest film as a director and as a writer. What was it like for you to be at these two screenings where you could feel the energy and the reaction from this audience?
Oh, I mean, it was incredible, and it was sort of exactly what you hope for. It's sort of I've been working on this project for 13 years, so it's been a long journey to get here, and so. But you do it all for the audience. You do it all for that moment of are they going to be into it? Are they with it? Do they care? And so it was so wonderful and gratifying just to sort of to see it out in the world with real people watching it for the first time.
Like, what was your take on the book and what informed your approach to how you were going to write and structure the story?
I mean, it was interesting. So as I said, 13 years ago, I came to it. I knew Jack L. High, who wrote the book a little bit because we had collaborated on something else that didn't end up getting made. But he was nice enough to send me the proposal for the book, which was only about 5 or 6 pages, and told that sort of story of Kelly and Goering. And it was the quickest I'd said yes to anything in my life because I just sort of went, oh, this is such an incredible relationship between these two guys, and also something I'd never seen before or knew about. I didn't know there were psychiatrists in World War II. I certainly didn't know that one had been brought in to evaluate the Nazi high command at the end of the war. And so it was a subject I sort of thought I knew about. It's sort of I'd studied the trials in school in America, just in American history, and yet as I got into it, realized there was so much I didn't know anything about. So I used my own money to option it, which you're never supposed to do. Pro tip, don't do that to other writers, but I did. And Jack was writing the book as I was sort of starting to research it, so he was sending me pages, and it was really interesting. And I thought at first it was going to be a very small story about these two guys in a cell and their relationship. But as I began researching it, I came across the story of Robert Jackson, Michael Shannon's character, who wasn't really in Jack's book. And the fact that nobody wanted to put on the trials, which I didn't know. I just sort of, assumed. I was like, well, the World War II ended and then they put on the trials, and that, all of that, foregone conclusion that would be something that would happen, when in point of fact, the U.S. Army was completely against it. They were sort of said, you want to put men on trial for following orders? You think that's a good thing to establish in international law? There'd never been an international tribunal before. And Jackson said, we can't just do this alone. We need the French, we need the British, we need the Russians. And it was the beginning of the Cold War when we're not looking at each other very friendly, but we need the Russians to cooperate with us. He went out, got all of that done, then takes a leave of absence from the Supreme Court to become the U.S. lead chief prosecutor at the trials. I'd never heard of Robert Jackson. I think he's an American hero. And I was like, oh God, I thought my movie was over here, but really I think it's also over here, And then I read about Leo Woodall's character, Howie Trius, the translator, and his story. And I went, oh my gosh, I think my movie's also over here. So as a writer, that was terrifying because, a lot of times adaptation is about subtraction. You have a 350-page book and you got to get it into 2 hours. So it's all about what can you lose? What can you lose? And this went the exact opposite way. It just kept gaining things and gaining stories. And I kept coming across stuff and going, oh, that's got to go in the movie. Oh, that's got to go in the movie. And so I really, for a long time, was sort of wrestling with the scope of it. But ultimately, I got it all in the movie, and I think that for me, the journey to do that ultimately pays, I think, real dividends because there is a scope to the film. There is a sort of you feel the size of it and the weight of what all of these men went through in order to bring these trials to bear.
All right. So in terms of the structure of the film, it's like, when I saw it a second time, I was really like noticing how, it doesn't really follow like a typical conventional three-act structure.
No.
So, but you're right, in terms of bringing in, other characters that were not in the book and focusing on this, everything around the psychiatrist played by Rami and then
Yeah.
extending it into the trial. So how did you crack it? How did you like go, and now I'm ready to roll camera?
Yeah, I mean the structure, and thank you for asking that too, because nobody asks that question. So I really appreciate it. No, the structure was I got to a point where I sort of went, okay, this is I really enjoy historical movies that are about events. You know what I mean? So not so much a biopic, and not, there's anything wrong. I love a biopic, but in terms of the things I write, I really sort of like events. And years ago, I made a movie called Zodiac with David Fincher, and it
Oh
was
yeah.
a similar thing where it was, okay, we're going to make a movie about an event, and it's okay that our main characters don't meet for an hour and change. It's okay that this character comes in way late. It's okay that and on that movie, I sort of was able to learn that it's okay to give myself permission to deviate from that, as long as what you're putting on the page and what you're putting on screen is dramatically compelling, and that it's exciting and it's additive to not only the story you're telling with the facts, but the emotional story and the emotional journey of these characters. So once I had that, I was like, okay, let's follow the event. So what's the first thing that happens that kicks all of this off? It's that Hermann Goering surrenders on the last day of the shooting war in Europe. So that's where we start. We start on a road in Austria, and he's in this gigantic limo, and he goes and he's looking for soldiers to surrender to, but also doesn't want to get shot doing it, right?
Yeah.
So you get to sort of see that. Then you see him taken in. Then you go to Michael Shannon's character and you see him find out that Hermann Goering has surrendered. And he goes, okay, we have to figure out how to not shoot him in the head, because Churchill and Roosevelt had sort of said these guys are to be executed within 48 hours of being captured. That was the standing order.
Yeah.
And he was like, okay, we have to not do that. We have to do something else. And then you go and you meet Rami, who's been given these mysterious orders to go to Morndorf, and he thought he was going home. It's the end of the war. Rah rah, like we get to go home. And instead, he's sent to this grand hotel where John Slattery's character says, "All right, so upstairs we have the entire Nazi high command. Don't want to freak you out, and your job is to evaluate them." And then we're sort of off to the races with our characters.
All right. So in terms of these characters, who was the first person you cast? And tell me about the first conversations you had with that actor.
The first person was Russell, because I always knew the question from every other actor is going to be, who's Goering? You know what I mean? He's the fulcrum on which all of this sort of turns. So I knew I needed somebody for that part, and I really wanted somebody who you knew as an audience member that you had a relationship with. And to be perfectly honest, I wanted somebody who usually played heroes and had that magnetism, and that as an audience, someone we have loved for many years, because Goering is a charmer. And this is well documented, by the way, too. Considered very charming, very funny. Someone once described him as the best dinner party guest you'd ever have at your house. And I knew that part of that story is his a little bit of his relationship with Kelly, but a little bit of a seduction, right? These are two men who are both trying to get something out of each other. They're both trying to kind of play each other. It's a game of chess. It's a psychological sort of battle between them. So I knew that whoever that was, and look, there are wonderful character actors out there who can do it. There are wonderful German actors out there who can do it. But I wanted a movie star with that movie star quality who could pull you in. And so, yeah, sorry, go on.
No, yeah, I was going to say, in terms of just that chemistry, that seduction, Crowe played it perfectly. Like you're watching the film and you're going like, yeah, okay, evil or not, I could see how this guy would seduce a whole army and a whole nation.
Yeah,
And Russell Crowe is obviously an amazing actor, Oscar winner. But this is his very, very best performance, I would say, since Cinderella Man, and that was 20 years ago.
thank
That's
you.
just my opinion. But you know what, James? I would love to hear how his involvement sort of helped evolve the screenplay of maybe a little further? Because I'm sure someone like Russell Crowe
Yeah.
is going to come into a project and maybe have some ideas about characterization.
Absolutely. And that's also what as a director I want. You know what I mean? It's that thing where I love actors who, come with ideas. I sort of feel like the worst version of the movie would be, oh, they just did it how I had it in my head, right? You know what I mean? They're not puppets. You hire them for their talent, for their experience, for their brains and their thoughts and ideas. And Russell, one of the first conversations I had with him, he said, "Look, I'm going to need to treat Herman as a human being, and I'm going to need to get inside that. It's not about playing the Reich Marshal and the Nazi. It's about playing the person underneath that. And I loved that. I thought that was a great way, and that's what I wanted from all of the actors, is to play the human moments and the failings and the foibles and stuff like that. And Russell just went incredibly deep with it. And in terms of the screenplay, a lot of the stuff in the movie is real stuff. It's from when we're in court. Those are court transcripts. That's the real stuff that they were saying. It's the stuff in the cell comes from a lot of Kelly's notes, because Kelly wrote a book. Rami's character wrote a book. 22 Cells in Nuremberg, Jack's book, Colin Hanks's character wrote a book. Everybody wrote a book. Slattery's character wrote a book. They all wrote books, which was fantastic. We could draw from all of that. But I remember sitting with Russell at his house, sometimes just he and I, and then sometimes with Michael Shannon too, because of their exchange in the courtroom at the end of the movie, just poring over transcripts of what was really said. The other thing Russell found was he found this out of print book, which was Goering's speeches to the Reichstag and talking about how he felt about the other Nazis. So I remember Russell coming to me one day and sort of going, he hated Goebbels. I figured this out. He thought he was an idiot. Like, look at the speech he gave. So it was a combination of all of those sort of things, and then honing in on the script, honing in on those moments, and showing, he tells it was in the script originally, but he tells a story about Goering's childhood and his upbringing and his relationship with a family friend and his mother. I don't want to give away, but it was just the humanity and the you get to a moment where you're sort of going, do I feel bad for Hermann Goering? And it was really, I think it was important to show sort of all aspects of that character, and it was important to Russell and it was important to me.
All right. So first of all, James, I got to say that no matter how big, no matter how small the role is, every character is so fully realized, stands out. I mean, Slattery for sure, Colin Hanks for sure. And I just think that's really, really hard to do, especially when you're basing something on a real story. And you did the same thing, honestly, with Zodiac 2, which came out in 2007. But Rami Malek, who is obviously an Oscar winner for Bohemian Rhapsody, I easily his best performance in this that since Bohemian Rhapsody. So tell me about your conversations with him, and also, like, did you do some kind of like screen test between Rami and Russell to see how they would go at it together? Because those are some of the most powerful moments in the film.
No, I mean, we didn't do a screen test. I just knew. And not to say, you always are nervous. You're always sort of going, okay, is the souffle going to rise? But I just went, these two guys are such brilliant actors, and they're also so different. And that's one of the things I loved about it as well. I sort of feel like casting is sort of like cooking. Like, it's like not all of the ingredients can be the same flavor, or it's not going to be an interesting dish, and Rami has this electricity to him and this intensity to him, but vibrates on a very different level than Russell does. And so I sort of thought, well, that's going to be really interesting to see those characters rub up against each other. And Rami came in and Rami raised his hand for it too. I mean, he's a guy in his career who could sit back and just wait for read the script. And if you say yes, you'll get these millions of dollars, and
Yeah.
do that. He sought this out. He asked his agent, he said, what's good out there? And his agent thankfully gave him this script. And
Oh,
and I got an incoming call that Rami Malek is interested and wants to meet. And I went, oh my God, like that would be incredible, And so we sat down and talked about it. And I remember our first meeting, we met for like 3 hours at a hotel. And then he said, hey, I'm going to be in your neighborhood tomorrow. Can I come by your house? And I said, yeah. He showed up at my house at 8 a.m, met all of my kids, met my dog. Like, we're trying to get the kids out of the door. He would stay the whole day. And we just sat in my office and went through the script line by line by line. And he went, and he kept going, what do you think this means? What does this mean to you? And I would sort of say, it was a game of chess, because I was like, I know what it means to me. What do you think it means? Like, what do you, and he's like, well, I think, so it was immediately just him working with me and working with the text and trying to figure out his way in and trying to figure out Kelly's way in. And how do you go from a guy who's very confident and funny and, I think, sexy at the beginning of the movie, because we really didn't want it to do a psychiatrist, stroking your beard, tell me about your mother sort of archetype. We really wanted to portray him as sort of what he was, which is kind of this roguish, interesting, sexy guy. And then he goes through this amazing transformation throughout the movie. And it's sort of, how do you get from A to B to C to D? And how does he become compromised in the ways he becomes compromised? And, he just, the thing about these guys is they never settle, which is fantastic. They're always trying to scratch at it and go a little deeper and figure out another level and figure out another, oh, maybe it's this, let's try this. And I love that. So, as a director, I just feel like, someone once said to me, there's a director of photography, there's a production designer, there's no director of actors. That's your job. So, my job is to create a space for these guys to come in and play, because it's called a play, right? It's the screenplay. Yep. It's and explore and play with each other and find out the truth of the scene on the day. And so blessed to have a cast of actors this talented and this dedicated who did that with me.
I mean, for sure, they absolutely did. I want to go back to that souffle moment that you were referring to before, James, because, when you did get Rami and Russell together, whether it was for a rehearsal scene or even principal photography when you started shooting, and you got them together and you saw the vitality between them and you saw that souffle rise, do you remember that moment when you go, pinch me, I must be dreaming. This is exactly what I wanted, and then some?
Yeah, there were two in particular I remember immediately. So the first one was, we did a table read in Budapest, and it was the first day they met. And they sat next to each other. And the thing with a table read is, and especially as a director, you say to the actors, just read it out loud. Don't go for it. Don't, you know what I mean? This is like, it's like fight choreography. We're going to do this a quarter speed. You don't need to, give it, because the last thing you want to do is waste it in a table read where there are no cameras, right? So I give that speech and everybody starts, and it's very quiet, and just we're reading it through so we can all hear it, and experience that. And they started their first scene kind of at a quarter speed. And then I could see them looking at each other and going, I'm gonna try this, and start to poke at each other a little bit with lines and as they sort of leveled up and leveled up and leveled up, by halfway through it, they were going full speed at each other in a way that I just was sitting on the end of the table going, oh man, we've got it. We've got it. These guys are, I mean, I just want to, it's like, can we bring a camera in now? Like, I know they're in street clothes and we're in a, it's in a room in a hotel, but can we shoot this, please? So yeah, that was the pinch me moment. And then the first day of photography was actually the first scene they meet, where Rami and Leah Woodall go in to Russell in the hotel, and just watching them do that was like, oh, we're home. We've got this. This is, so gratifying as a director. It's sort of like you have to remember to call cut. It's like, you get to the scene, you're like, what is everybody? Oh, I have to call cut. Shoot. Okay. Cut. That was great. Going again.
I gotta say, one of the great movie entrances actually happens in your film when Goring steps out of the limo and he's like got his bag. It's like waiting for like somebody to take his bags, and war's over, you lost, and he's still like expected to be treated like royalty. But so when it came to Russell and Rami, I'm wondering, James, like what surprise? You knew you were going to get great performances from them, but what was it about these guys, Michael Shannon too, that surprised you?
I mean, I think it was it was a lot of different things. With Russell and Rami, it really was how much they fed off each other and how much they, really, really got into it. When, there are moments in the movie where they, there's a scene where the sort of both of their masks kind of drop and they sort of say all of the worst things they can to the other one. And they look, they're professional actors and they're not, but they were nose to nose, and the intensity of that, I was just like, this is incredible. I remember our camera operator James Goldman came out of the cell at one point and goes, "It's getting a little hot in there." And he meant the internal temperature because they were both kind of pacing and kind of, and one of the things we did with that cell is, it was a set. We built the set and it's built to scale, and you build a set so you can pull walls to move cameras wherever you want to. And Darius Walsky, the incredible cinematographer, and I made a deal with each other that we were never going to pull a wall, that we were going to keep them confined in there. So it's Rami and Russell and two cameras, two camera operators, a boom operator, an assistant I mean, they are just packed in there, and the intensity of it is incredible. And then look, Michael Shannon just he's an actor's actor, and he's the actor. There's the phrase "comedian's comedian," which is the comedians that all the other comedians are in all of. That's with actors. So the other actors, were just, especially the younger ones, are a little bit in awe of him. Like, oh, I can't believe I'm in a scene with Michael Shannon, and he's just so dedicated to his job, the preparation he does. He just wants to go. He doesn't want to spend hours and hours and hours talking about the character. He just wants to live with the script, live with the moments, and go. And he was a guy who, the longer the scene was, the more comfortable he was. So the short scenes, and he said this, it was actually a really interesting revelation, because as a writer, you think about, all right, how late can we come into a scene and how early can we leave it? These little slices of things. And he sort of said, I get it, but as an actor, that's my nightmare, is I only have 3 lines, and I don't get to play the first half of this conversation. You know what I mean? So I don't know how I got to this. And I never thought about that before as a writer or director, and so that was a real sort of interesting education for me. And then he got into the longer scenes, and it was, I mean, just amazing. And the story I want to tell, just in terms of surprising, and, we had that, there's the cross-examination at the end of the movie, about 20 pages of dialogue, you know what I mean? And it's a big scene. And the first day he had blocked out 4 days to shoot it, and do the first quarter, then come back the second day, do the second quarter, and so on. And I said to her, I was like, they're not going to want to do that. And she goes, what are you talking about? I was like, they're going to want to do the whole thing. And she's like, that's crazy. You don't shoot 22 pages of dialogue you just don't do it. It's a bad idea from a production standpoint. And I said, they're going to want to do it. And I went to Russell and I went to Michael. I said, so, do you want to do that? But I didn't tip it. I said, do you guys want to do it over 4 days? And they were like, no, what are you talking about? Like, we want to do it in 1 day. So we set up 4 cameras, 2 on Michael, 2 on Russell, in the courtroom. And they learned it, and we had talked it through a bunch. And then they just went, and the first take, 25-minute take. And at the end of it, the extras burst into applause, which again doesn't happen on a movie set. And just one of the most amazing days. And we did it all day and moved the cameras around, but each take was 25 minutes long, word perfect. 2 guys 50 feet away from each other, by the way. They're not, and Michael can't, it's not a normal courtroom, where usually the lawyer can move. Tom Cruise moves all around with Jack Nicholson, and Law and Order, McCoy is everywhere, and kind of you change it. But because of the way that courtroom was built, the Jackson couldn't move. He had to stay at that lectern. So you had 2 guys in the same position for 25 minutes going at each other. And it's one of the most dynamic things I'd ever seen as a director. It was just an incredible day on set.
Also got to give a big shout out to Richard E. Grant, who was also magnificent in that scene. Not going to say why, but James, so you filmed that in complete takes. How many takes did you do? Is there one particular take that gets into the film, or was it like editing between the different takes that you used?
That's a great question. I think we did it 8 times.
Wow.
I think the last one were just wides, because we were like, we got it. I want to say, I think it was the first and third takes are the ones that you're seeing in the film. And that's honestly only because of camera position. It's not performance. We could have lived in the first take and been fine, but we started a little wider to get the guy. It was so funny because I was like, all right, the first take, we'll let him warm in. And by this point, I knew that Michael and Russell both come off the blocks. Different actors are different. So some actors, you're like, fourth take is always the one that they're great in. Like, they need the first and second and third to kind of warm up. Michael and Russell are from the jump take one guys. And so I was like, so a lot of the stuff where you're kind of here is take one, and then when you're here is take three. Um, but I mean, it was just, we got into, I remember our editor, Tom Eagles, because we shot it fairly early. When we were going into the courtroom, Tom goes, look, do me a favor, just make sure you shoot enough footage because it's a big set and I just want to make sure I have enough to cut to. And then we shot that day and he called me, I take it back. There's so much footage. Good. You're so good. Like I have so much to work with.
Yeah, good problem to have. But
Yeah.
the other thing, so here's the thing. So while I was watching the film, for both times, I gotta say, I kept leaning forward in my seat. That's when I know that I'm really into a film. And during the courtroom scene, the first time in TIFF, I turned to the person next to me who I didn't know, and I just went like, "Wow, like are you seeing this?" And I just they don't make movies like this anymore. This felt like such a movie I would watch with my dad, and because of that, like when I was growing up, World War II was like yesterday practically,
Yeah.
and in terms of like extended members of my family, it was like they were there, they lived through it and everything. But now, 2025, I feel like talking about World War II, talking about Nazis and the Holocaust, whatever, you could be talking about like the Revolutionary War is how long ago it feels
Absolutely.
like. So what for you, James, like informed, and this will be my last question for you, informed your approach to make it current so people today will get it?
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, and it's the same. I think we're the same generation. It's my grandfathers fought in World War II. It felt like something, and I had friends who lost relatives in the camps. It was something that was sort of alive for me, and I could kind of hear about from people I loved who went through it, and kind of touch. And as you say, for kids, it's so far in the past, which is how time works. It's
Yeah.
okay, but it's and one of the things, bringing the past back to life was really important to me. But one of the ways I really wanted to go about it was I feel like so many movies that take place in this time period assume a level of knowledge and understanding. So, I'll see a World War II movie and it assumes I know that Churchill was this and, was, in the wilderness and they brought him back in and it's like, I know that, but not everybody, my 14-year-old who's very smart, he doesn't know any of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And his classmates do. So I really wanted this movie to start at zero from a place of I'm going to assume you know nothing. And I'm going to entertainingly teach you about what was going on. Because I think one of the great things about those movies I love is you learn about, it's like when I watch Crimson Tide, I learn how a nuclear submarine works. Like that, there's a joy in that, that sort of exposition. It's not boring. It's actually exciting. And so I wanted this movie to do that. And so when Leo Woodall talks about what the final solution is, I remember conversations with certain people going, do we need that? Do we need to? And I said, we absolutely need that. We need, because there are people who don't know that that's what they called it and that's what the plan was. And so our movie needs to touch that in order for when it comes up in the courtroom to understand exactly what they're talking about. So that really was my approach, was that I'm not going to assume anybody's coming into this with any prior knowledge. I'm going to try and make this movie for everybody and make it emotional, not just a history lesson, not just because it's the thing I love about movies the most is like you can read books, you can watch documentaries, you can memorize facts and figures, but nothing is a substitute for a really well-told film that emotionally takes you through this and makes you understand what these people have been through and makes you understand what it ultimately is at stake in that courtroom emotionally. And that's why I sort of tried to build it as a thriller and as a piece of, hopefully very good entertainment that makes you laugh and cry. Those are the movies I grew up loving, and hopefully that's the movie that we got to make.
That is certainly the movie you got to make. And I got to tell you that that last speech that Leo gives before he walks off, everybody, both times at TIFF and at AFI, the audience applauded. So talk about a movie that is very, very much speaking to everybody, regardless of age. James Vanderbilt, you made one of the very, very, very best movies of the year. I cannot wait for people to see this film. Big congrats to you. I hope we can continue this conversation in person in front of an audience. Thank you for joining me here on Consider This, and all the best to you, everyone. See Nuremberg only in theaters, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Scott. What a pleasure.